From El Paso, Texas to Boston, Massachusetts, you're listening to Beyond the Beltway. Let's go to El Paso, Texas right now, where Steve is listening to us on KTSM. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I wanted to address the problem where women in the Islamic world are typically treated in various degrees of atrociousness. It ranges from really bad stuff in parts of Africa, female circumcision and the resultant genital mutilation, to relatively innocuous things like different standards for dress and other things like that. And I never hear anyone in the Muslim world offer a good defense for this. Their justifications range from, well, our religion asks that of women and they do it willingly, or your religion is also bad. And I reject all those arguments as fallacious. It's never valid to say, well, it's okay because you guys do bad things too. Two wrongs don't make a right. And to claim that it's okay because our God wants us to is also fallacious, and I'd like to see this addressed.
Let's let Geety respond to that. We should also mention that you are an advisor on gender issues to the World Bank,
right.
and you've studied and written on this particular topic. So,
absolutely.
So put it in context.
Number one, we have to remember that the Islamic world is not a monolithic kind of society. There are 1.5 billion Muslims, and in many of these countries, the treatment of women has been influenced by the cultural and social norms that were in place before Islam came. This is true of the origin of, let's say, the original home of Islam in Arabia, to the rest of the Middle East, to Indonesia, to Africa. So you really have to make a distinction about where you're talking about. Now, I'm a Muslim woman.
What about the Quran, though?
The Quran, in fact, is, if you look at it in terms of a religious text and you compare it to either the Old Testament or the New Testament, you will see that in probably in most ways, and of course Joe has also studied this issue, and the role of women in the Quran is much more progressive by our standards of today than the other two major religions of Abrahamic religions.
Progressive in what way?
Progressive, let's say, women in Islam, they inherit. When they get married, consent is important. They become independent. When they're married, they have control of whatever wealth they have and assets. The husband, nobody else can enter or touch their assets. They can do whatever they want. They can engage in anything they want to do. They can be educated. They could be educated historically, and this went on in the medieval times. Many Muslim women became important theologians in their own rights, and they taught men. It's true, seclusion was one of the highlights, or one of the important marks.
So when did the exclusions and the repression of women that is more popularly known now, when did that begin?
Well, we have to again remember where we're talking about, because to begin with, as the caller said, many of these women would like to feel they're protected or they are dressed appropriately. Again, in the West, let's say, women can wear a bikini when they go to the beach. But do you see women, let's say, if they're going to work, would they be dressing bikini? No, because there are standards and conventions on how people dress. And the same thing applies to women in the Middle East. This is a part of the culture. It's a part of the practice. I don't do it when I go to one of these countries. I may wear a scarf. But this was also true of all societies in the past. Women in the past, whether it was classical Greece, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, they all were secluded and covered their hair. If you look at pictures of Madonnas in, let's say, medieval paintings, you will always see the Madonna's hair is covered with something, because this was a very widespread practice throughout the world.
Ahmad.
I agree with everything Geety just said, and I'll add that some of the problems that we face in terms of the stereotyping of Muslims or the misperceptions regarding Muslims is the tendency to generalize, the tendency to view all Muslims and Islam as a whole as a single monolith that acts and behaves the same way, and more often than not, it's appropriated to the worst specimen of behavior in the Muslim majority world rather than to the best. And so I will tell our caller, for example, to consider the lifestyle of the average Muslim woman in Istanbul or Cairo versus that in the mountains of Afghanistan or in one of the villages in the desert region of Saudi Arabia. And you'll find that they're wholly different in the way they look, in the way they behave, in the way they think. And so Islam, or Muslims in general, are not a monolith. I will add that there are Muslims who have rendered a perverse interpretation to the Islamic texts. And so, yes, it is mostly cultural that Muslim women their rights are abused, but also I will admit that there are Muslim men in the Muslim majority world who have unfortunately submitted to a perverse interpretation of Islam.
If you draw a line in history, say the year 900, and compared the life of women in Islamic communities as they were then with those that were Christian or Jewish communities, by and large, a woman would be better off in an Islamic community in the year 900 in most places, not everywhere, but in most places in the world. That isn't the case today, and the question is what happened? And the answer adverts to something I think that Gidi mentioned before, that in a few centuries ago, something happened, and the West continued to make social and cultural and civilizational progress, and the Islamic world, for some reason, ground to a halt. And now, with the world getting smaller because of communication and so on, coming face to face with that, it produces shame and horror and reaction and so forth in Islamic communities. The question, and it's a question that all of us in good faith have been wrestling with, and lots of Muslim leaders and many, and now this President of the United States also wrestling with, how can that change? How can that be brought about to change? A bellwether, a crucial question for kind of measuring the progress of a civilization is how it treats its women. Absolutely crucial. And any community that rules out of the possibilities of education and rules out of the possibilities of involvement in the sciences and in the arts and in communication and expression is really doing injury to itself, because in every culture it is women who are bringing up children.
And that's a discussion happening.
No, you may not, but what you can do is you can say it in the next hour. For those watching us on television, we're going to see you next week. For those listening to us on radio, 1-800-723-8289 is the phone number. All of our guests will be back for a next full hour. And if you're watching this on television, the rest of this conversation will be next week's broadcast. I'm Bruce Dumont, back shortly from Chicago.